Next is Josh Judd. Hi, Josh. Thanks for joining us on the show. Josh is one of our sponsors. Josh, thanks. On behalf of everyone here, thank you for coughing up some dough. That was a delightful, snack. Josh Judd is the Chief Technology Officer of Warp Mechanics. He's going to be giving us a talk today called Enhancing Lustre Security with the Whitelist Blacklist patch. Thanks, Josh. Thanks to Warp. Let's hear it for him. Josh Judd. Woo!
Apparently that safe harbor thing means if anything I tell you makes your environment break, it's not my fault. So Warp builds turnkey Lustre appliances like a lot of the other vendors here, and in order to do that we use our concoction of OEM grade hardware and our concoction of software. Our software involves things that are completely open source. You can download them off GitHub with our own enhanced management tools, monitoring tools, patches, and whatnot. We believe that anything you take from the open source community should be given back. We don't believe in closed sourcing something that started out as open source. So whenever we're getting ready for one of these speaking slots, I talk to Sims and others in the community about what aspect of Warp's operating system the community would most be interested in hearing about. So everything I'm going to talk about is stuff you can go off and do yourself. It's not a sales pitch for a Warp product. It's a notion of how you can make your own Lustre environment more secure. So we do sell this stuff, but it's not that you have to buy anything from me to get anything that I'm about to talk about. The request to Warp was to talk about how Warp approaches enhancing security in Lustre in a completely open manner. So you don't have to buy a proprietary Warp secure Lustre widget. You can just do this stuff to make your thing more secure. I'll talk very briefly about overall security, but mostly I'm going to talk about how we approached a Lustre-specific security enhancement and why we thought it was a cool thing. The caveats with this are that we only do Lustre over ZFS. We haven't done Lustre LDiskFS since 2011. So nothing that I'm about to talk about has been tested or vetted in any way on an LDiskFS system. I think ROS build might still have LDiskFS in it, but we don't use it. We've only tested the secure Lustre stuff at the scale of an individual scalable storage unit. So in large Lustre, you buy things in some number of racks of Lustre capacity, and you scale by adding another rack and another rack and another rack. We've tested this stuff up to a single rack. We hope to be able to do, the 10 plus petabyte scale multi-SSU testing in a month or so. We're still working with one of the labs to line that up. So the major caveats are I haven't tested with LDiskFS and I haven't tested with 10 plus petabyte scale, only with single scalable storage unit. The first thing is that you have to do all the normal security stuff, in my opinion. Lustre historically, step one was turn off all security and then install Lustre. It's now possible to have SE Linux, IPtables, etc. turned on. If you want to secure your environment, make sure you change your passwords, make sure you change your SNMP community strings. Don't forget all the basic Linux sysadmin security stuff, in short. SSH and other services. This is another one that people often forget. Change the default SSH port. It takes very little time, and it makes it much, much harder for scanners, etc., to find that your system even exists, much less break into it. And we also recommend disabling every service that isn't critical to the system. By default, Warp Storage operating system comes with everything turned off except for SSH, and then you have to turn on services one at a time until you have a working solution for the customer. I tend to recommend that you take the same approach if you're building your own Lustre solution. IPtables, I'm not going to read this at you, but it's actually not that hard to start using IPtables with Lustre. It's, you know, a half a dozen or so commands, and then suddenly your system is relatively more secure. Worth doing. But again, most of the security related to a Lustre OSS isn't Lustre itself, it's going to be the OS, like SE Linux. If you can't audit whether people are attacking your system or not, then it's going to be relatively hard for you to stop them from getting it eventually. So just do all the basic sysadmin security stuff. Accounts, password policies. Since I only have a few minutes in this slot, I'm going to gloss over that, but I intentionally left it all on the slide so that you can peruse it in the downloads later. So if I jump past this stuff, it's not because I'm saying don't do it, it's because I don't have enough time to go over it in detail. The main thing I wanted to talk about here is the Lustre WhitelistBlacklist mechanism. Let's say that Warp has a customer requirement to actually enhance Lustre security itself. Not Linux security, but Lustre security. Well, first thing I would want to be able to do is at the Lustre code layer, accept or reject individual client requests. If somebody comes in from the wrong IP address, just don't let them connect, right? If you do that in a whitelist format, you can define your overall cluster IP range very efficiently using netmasks and so forth, and in a matter of minutes, say, nobody who isn't my cluster can attach. That gets you really far in terms of security compared to what Lustre comes with normally. Normally, anybody who shows up and can physically hook up to your network could potentially get into the file system. So one of Warp's buddies at Naval Research Lab created this whitelist feature for the government, and he was kind enough to contribute it to the community as a patch. Bolting it in to your own Lustre build. It's not currently in any of the pre-built downloadable Lustres. You have to be, you know, the crazy folk like, you know, Warp who build your own Lustre from source code. But if you download the patch, you can, in more or less one command, bolt it into your Lustre release and, you know, make RPMs and then install them, okay? What this does, in addition to being able to whitelist your cluster, it implicitly allows you to blacklist anybody in your cluster who's misbehaving. So if you define the subnet of allowed IP ranges, and one of those clients is behaving badly, today, if you, on the MDS, if you issue an evict for a client, nothing stops them from just reconnecting. A Lustre client who's been evicted will just log back in. With the Warp version of this, you can punch a hole in your subnet range and say, everybody except him is allowed to connect, then evict him, and when he tries to log back in, he can't get back in. So in addition to being a security enhancement, it's also a reliability enhancement. One of the biggest problems we've had managing Lustre systems is the misbehaving client. You have one really bad client that's attacking your OSSs, it causes them to LBug, panic, crash, reboot, whatever. This way, your OSSs can auto-magically notice that the bad guy is coming from this IP address, blacklist him out, evict him, and then, you know, the attack stops. He can keep trying to connect till he's blue in the face, but he won't be able to talk to Lustre anymore. So once you have this patch set up, there's a couple of commands that are defined for managing it. You can list the allowed NIDs, set the permitted NIDs. Pretty straightforward. It uses the same format as root squash. So if you give a range initially, it's a very efficient, colon separated subnet range or whatever of the root squash syntaxes you wish to use. If you want to use this whitelist feature as a blacklist, you would have to create logic in your code that separates the range, the efficiently defined range into two inefficiently defined ranges. There is not yet a blacklist feature per se. You have to create two separate whitelists and reapply the LCTL command and then do an evict. Okay, so just a little tip when you're building it, and that actually says what I just said. So, since I only have 2 minutes left, are there any questions about the feature? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? If you have any further questions about that feature or any of Warp's other enhancements, as I've said, we open source all of our enhancements, so just feel free to stop by our booth at the back, and we'll be happy to have a technical chat.
Josh.